Is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Fatboyz Dynasty Podcast presented by the Fantasy Holics Podcast Network. I'm Bo. That is Brant. Usually I wouldn't start the show out like this, Brant. Usually I'd try to come up with something a little more creative to talk about what's on the docket for the show today. We do have some free agency stuff, some NFL Combine stuff. But first and foremost, man, let's rip it off like a Band-Aid. What the hell's going on in Seattle, Brant?
So Seattle, we saw Ryan Grubb get released as our OC because him and McDonald were butting heads about McDonald wanted to run the ball, and he didn't. And now it's looking like McDonald's saying, hey, we're going to run the ball. This is what I want. This is the offense I want to run. DK, you and me have talked about this. I'm not he's a very talented wide receiver. He's, has all the talent in the world. I don't like his hothead. I don't like the diva attitude in Seattle. That is me as a Seahawks fan. Great fantasy receiver. He was a little inconsistent this year. You and me talked about that. But he's very talented. I just don't like the hotheadness there in Seattle. I've kind of wanted him out the last 2 years. It'd be interesting to see what we get and how these trade rumors go. I'm expecting there to be a lot of calls. You and me talked about it earlier. The Chargers would be a great fit. A buddy of ours said the Patriots would probably be knocking on that door pretty quick. I think they're going to field calls, but I don't know. You and me talked about how it's so hard to find, a good pick for a wide receiver. And Debo going for a fifth, and then what was the last first round draft pick that was traded? You and me talked about this. Brandon Cooks. You just don't see it. And so we talked about Dallas giving up even more for that no-name guy out of Carolina.
Jonathan Mingo.
Mingo, yes. Yeah. So I don't think Seattle's going to fall in love with an offer. I would honestly expect this could be lingering on after the draft and possibly into the season of DK being unhappy. I do think a lot of offers will be coming. I just don't know if anything will knock their socks off. Tyler Lockett, I love Tyler Lockett. This was a sad, sad day. I did see it coming out of Seattle. I think McDonald only re-signed him to stay afloat in Seattle, because if you cut a staple in Seattle like that, that's your first Band-Aid rip as a new coach. You're probably going to catch a whole bunch of repercussions there, whiplash from the fans. Lockett is huge in the community, owns his own real estate. He's been Walter Payton Man of the Year. He does community service out the butt there in Seattle. So a lot of people saw this coming. He's a great talent. He's getting up there in age. He's been in the pros for 10 years. I expect to see him probably sign with the Raiders, reunite with Pete Carroll, be that veteran presence in a young locker room that's probably going to be there. And Pete's veteran enough for everybody in the NFL with his age. But I expect Lockett probably to end up there. And as for DK, it's going to be real interesting to see. So I think Seattle's going to do exactly what McDonald wants. We're going to see them pound the ball and focus on the defense. You score 14 points a game, we're going to score 17. That's going to be it. I'm going to say it because I'm going to at least once this episode. It's Jake Bobo time in Seattle. Give me more Bobo. As of right now, he's going to fill in the DK role if DK decides to go somewhere. That's just as of right now.
Yeah, so, obviously that was a lot, and obviously we had to let you have your time as a Seahawks fan, but, the New York Jets offense is having a big turnover this year. They released Devontae Adams, Aaron Rodgers out the door. There's some big turnover there. There's some big turnover in Seattle, and honestly, what this is doing actually in my perspective, from a fantasy perspective, and I know it's hard to take your fandom off your fandom hat off when it comes to the Seahawks and look at it from a fantasy perspective, but really it's creating some intriguing landing spots for some of these wideouts and what is not necessarily a top heavy wide receiver class, but a pretty deep wide receiver class where you could see these guys going now. And it's like, okay, if Seattle drafted a wide receiver and Lockett and DK were still on the roster, that wide receiver goes into non-existence, right? Mm-hmm. If Seattle drafts a wide receiver somewhere in the top 4 rounds now, all of a sudden it's going, okay, wait a minute, this guy's going to have some intrigue. Same thing with the Jets. Devontae Adams still in town along with, Garrett Wilson. All of a sudden it's like, I don't really want the third wide receiver in that offense. But the second wide receiver in that offense, there's some intrigue there. So obviously from a fantasy perspective, that definitely has you on the hook. And then also, like what you were talking about with Seattle, if they do go away from the wide receiver position and they become more of a run first team, or at least a more run balanced team, that should make Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker both more fantasy relevant on a routine basis rather than being one versus the other. I think you kind of alluded to it. They wanted to have like a three-headed punch with McIntyre, I believe it is, too. McIntosh. And so I think that what that does is that creates. I don't necessarily think I buy in on McIntosh having any fantasy relevancy barring an injury, but I think you will see both Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker having weekly fantasy relevance, regardless of who you guys play.
Yeah, I think McIntosh there in the backfield, he's going to take that little pass catching role. You may see him once or twice a quarter, like he's maybe going to get 10 total snaps a game. But when he's in, it's probably a passing down. Most likely he is a decent pass blocking back. So I expect him to be sprinkled in very, very lightly. And maybe he does have a good offseason. And then maybe we do have a three-headed backfield, and you and me are approaching that a little bit differently closer to season as some of the preseason and training camp rumors come out.
Yeah, and again, what's to say Seattle doesn't add another running back or something via free agency? I'd love to see J.K. Dobbins end up in Seattle just because I think your head would explode. But it'll be something to keep an eye on. And it really, honestly, just adds some layers of interest. Obviously, as a fan, you don't necessarily want to see DK go because of what he does offer when he's on the field. I remember, obviously, different situation with Julio Jones. I love Julio Jones. I will always love Julio Jones. Never wanted him to go to Atlanta, but it did sour or leave Atlanta, but it did sour very bad there at the end with the Shannon Sharp phone call and stuff. And at that point, it was like, okay, see ya, go kick rocks. Let's see what we can get for this guy. And then ultimately it does, at least for me with Julio, it come back and it was a little bittersweet. And I would still want him to retire Falcon and all that stuff. But so it'll give you some interesting, different things that you weren't necessarily expecting going into this free agency period in the draft. But anyway, we've spent a lot of time talking about your beloved Seahawks. Had to get it out there. Had to let you go on your little tangent. It's what makes being a podcast host special, right? Because if you want to do it, damn it, you get to do it.
That's right.
But we do have to get on to what we were talking about this episode, which is the NFL Combine. Kind of just a quick glance at some of the winners, losers from this year's Combine. And then we want to touch base on free agency, which the legal tampering period kicks off next Monday, so 5 days away. And then a week from today, we have official sign the dotted line, put the paper to pin. So you tell me where you want to go first, Brant, and we'll go down that road first.
Oh, I just flipped the paper over. Let's hit on some of this Combine here. I will be completely honest. I caught bits and pieces of it. I haven't dove into these numbers as deep as I want to. I will here shortly with the rookies and everything else. But I did grab two guys that kind of I was reading in on and kind of intrigued me. And then the news came out today, and this first one that I'm going to say it right now, and this one intrigued me a little bit more, is wide receiver Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State. He's 6'4", 214. He was height and weight compared to T. Higgins at the Combine. They were almost identical. I think the weight was like 2 pounds off. And then he ran a 4.47 40, same as A.J. Brown, I believe it was the comparing. Then he had a 39-inch vertical, which was compared to some of the best top or better wide receivers. This guy's just a big body guy. He has good hands. Doing some research, he's graded roughly not as good in all three aspects, but he is graded pretty close to Ted and also to Luther Burden. His hands, he had like a 2.6% drop rate in college. Like, this guy could be an instant factor, and a lot of people didn't even have him on his boards, and now people are talking this is the second, third round draft pick. This is the guy. If DK's out, I wouldn't mind seeing this guy in a Seahawks uniform.
Yeah, I don't know if you caught my reaction to you saying Jalen Higgins out of Ohio State. It just so happens I wrote down my wide receiver winner as Jalen Noel, the opposite wide receiver in Iowa State, who honestly, if I had to say, both of those two are the big winners outside of Marcus Golden, who I'll mention here in just a second. But Jalen Noel, the guy obviously who played opposite of the big-bodied Higgins, 5'10", 194 pounds. So yeah, a little bit of the smaller frame, and that would have been a thing that would have worried me, a little bit more had we not have seen guys like Devonta Smith come in and be successful, and some of these other guys. But here's the stuff that's really interesting to me, Brant. 4.39 40, so obviously very quick for his size, as you would expect. You ready for this? What he lacks in height, he makes up for in vertical. 41.5-inch vertical, Brant. Off the charts. And then this is the one that really kind of caught my eye and why I had to go him. Yeah, he's a little fella. 23 reps on the bench press, Brant. That's more than some offensive linemen get. This dude's yoked. I mean, you're hitting 23 reps at 225. You're not messing around at 5'10", 194 pounds. I can't imagine there's a lot of people in the world that are repping that many times at that size. So, this is obviously not a show where we're going to talk a whole lot about weightlifting. It's a little bit relevant in the combine, obviously. But, man, Jalen Noel, definitely a guy that really kind of, in my opinion, earned his bread, if you will, at the combine. The other one that I just want to talk about just for a minute, I thought it was interesting that Isaiah Bond came out from Texas and said, hey, Xavier Worthy was quick. I'm quicker. I'm going to break his 40 time. And then had his teammate Marcus Golden actually be the fastest wide receiver at the combine, which 4.39 is not slow by any stretch of the imagination. Anytime you get a sub 4.4 in the combine, it's impressive. It's just a little less impressive in recent memory. I'll let you go ahead with your next one, Brant. I do have a couple other guys still, so that I'll mention real quick after you get done with your next.
Well, you're talking about losers or draft stock go down. I do remember this popping up as a huge red flag. How about a guy that weighed in at 156-pound wide receiver at 5'10", 154? I apologize, 154 pounds of Tez Johnson. That guy's stock may have plummeted because that is just a little bit too tiny to probably told up to some of these big hits. So that was a guy that definitely is a guy that I'll be keeping an eye on and how he's able to kind of maneuver with those. I've got to watch some film on him because he is just a little guy, and me being upwards of almost double his weight, I can say he's just a little guy too. Like I did say, almost doubling his weight, not quite there, not quite,
right,
not quite. So that's a guy that I'm gonna have to dig into because I was huge on this guy. Like, this was my little sleeper guy when we talked about rookies. I was going to talk about him, and then I read that and I'm like, hold up, you're a tiny little fella. I don't know if that's going to hold up.
Yeah, and what's worse than that, Brand, is if you're going to be tiny, you better be what in the NFL?
You better
real fast, real. 4.51 for him in the 40 time. That's abysmal for a guy that size. That's
his pro day
not going to work out.
His pro day at Oregon is going to have to be huge for him. He's going to have to change something up, or I don't know, get faster quick, something.
Somewhere something's got to give. Okay, so real quick for me, you know what? I'll stay at his school in Oregon. I do have a winner from Oregon. That's Terrence Ferguson at the tight end position. This is a guy, obviously, the Colston Lovelace and Jalen Warren out of Penn State. I think it's Jalen, but I could be wrong. Who knows? 47 Jalen's in this draft. But anyway, Terrence Ferguson, if you listened to last week's episode, was a guy that I talked about, had the chance to really elevate himself. I also did talk about the Iowa tight end just because I said if Brant was here, this is who he'd be talking about, because if you go to Iowa, you get drafted in the tight end world. But Terrence Ferguson was a guy that I talked about that had a chance to really insert himself as that third tight end. 6'5" and 3/8 inches, 247 pounds. Ran a 4.63 40 at the tight end position. That's freakishly athletic. I put his stats out there last week, but was really kind of a focal point of that pass catching game in Oregon. This is a guy that I think there's some landing spots out there for him that if there isn't already a bona fide tight end, not saying Brock Bowers-esque season, because that's not happening anytime soon, but I do think you could see like a Dalton Kincaid rookie season, which we were all really happy with. Disappointed in year 2, but really happy with year 1. I think that's something that could potentially be for Terrence Ferguson. Moving on to the running back position, I had Jaden Blue as my winner there from that position. Again, another Texas guy. It seems like Texas is kind of NFLU, if you will. If you look at the last couple of years, Bijan Robinson, Roshan Johnson, Adonai Mitchell, the list goes on. And I know I'm missing some other big names there. So Jatavion Sanders. Anyway, everybody's performing at the combine from the University of Texas. Xavier Worthy is the obvious one. There we go. 4.38 fastest running back time on the 40 for Jaden Blue. He is a smaller fella, so I'm not sure how that build holds up in the NFL. But again, 4.38 at a running back, you're going to have some value. I did write this one down, Brant. This isn't my last one I want to talk about. I wrote this down as a loser. Is Cam Scatabo. And the only reason I put him down as a loser, Brant, is because all these other running backs came out and had pretty darn good days. A lot of guys were a little faster than they expected to be, measured up a little better than they expected to. And Cam Scatabo not competing because of his injury, which, again, is not his fault. But I think people being able to lay eyes on these guys and see these guys do their stuff probably shifted Cam a little bit on the leaderboard. I know you're a big Cam guy right now. Probably just need to draft Cam Scatabo in every league where you own Jake Bobo, and then you could just name your team the Three Bows. I think
he goes to the Raiders. There's a good chance I do.
I think Cam Scatabo's stock dropped a little bit because of that. He's the only one I had that is a loser. But my biggest one, and I just have to voice this, Brant, my biggest loser of the combine is Jalen Milroe out of the University of Alabama. I came on the show last week and I talked about how he had the most to gain because of how woeful his season was last year and how he could come out and put his freakish athleticism on display and wow some of these NFL teams. Him refusing to compete in the running stuff blew my wig back, Brand. We saw Anthony Richardson skyrocket up the draft board. A quarterback who played one season in the NFL or in the NCAA football as a starting quarterback for the Florida Gators really wasn't that impressive, but because he was a darn freakish athletic guy that could launch the ball a mile, he got drafted. Now look at him. He's frustrating, but he's fun for fantasy, but he's also a first-round pick. He's got skyrocketed up to number 4 with the Colts, Brant. Jalen Milroe, similar body build, similar ability. All I had to do was go put it on display for these NFL teams. Look how freakishly athletic I am. What I lack in accuracy, I make up for with my rushing upside, my mobility. And this guy really had a chance to go stamp his legacy, not only as potentially a top 4 quarterback. I know everybody's high on Jackson Dart as the big winner from the combine, and Shadur Sanders is potentially sliding. Jalen Milroe could have earned himself a big payday and skyrocketed himself maybe into some of those teams that are in the top 10 that are like, I'm not sold on Sanders. I'm not sold on Dart. Maybe they could have, and I just don't understand what, unless he plans on doing all the running at his pro day, which I still think obviously things are always a little bit more favorable for you at your pro day. So I don't know how much teams weigh the pro day versus the combine, but I was definitely disappointed in Jalen Milroe, Brant.
Yeah, so I didn't see that. I did see some articles on him not competing and everything, and that was already a question mark in my mind. He was, and that definitely raises a red flag. So one of my winners is, and I could be wrong, but I'm looking at the NFL.com, and he ran a 4.32 40 as a running back. And this is, as you saw me prior to with my phone up to my ear because I had to make sure I got his name right, is – hang on, let me pull it up real fast. Is Bashal Tutin, running back out of Virginia Tech. He ran a 4.32 40.
I think you're right. Yeah.
That's faster than Gibbs and Barkley both did at the combine. He's 206 pounds, 5'9", and a 40-inch vertical. This is a guy that showed off his athletic ability and got himself on some draft boards. Definitely. He got a 6.3 grade from NFL.com and their next gen stats, eventually a starter. This is a little project piece that you're going to see probably I want to say late day 2, maybe early day 3, but this is going to be a running back that is definitely going to shake up the running back rooms for somebody. And then my biggest loser is another quarterback as well, Will Howard. I watched this. This guy, he struggled on the deep routes. He was missing passes. He was missing wide receivers. His velocity, and accuracy just plummeted whenever the deep routes came. It was inaccurate. It was inconsistent. This is one guy that could have hurt himself drastically. Maybe he should have backed out of the throwing.
All right, so that's kind of our take on the combine. Obviously, there'll be more talk on rookies on this show, much more as we get into the NFL draft season. And obviously we'll talk about some mock drafts from some of the more prestigious folks and what we think of some of their landing spots for the fantasy relevant guys as we get going. But Brant, I think it's pressing concern time. We got to talk about the NFL free agency period. It's too close for us not to discuss it. What I want to do here is I've got some fantasy net relevant names. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time doing this because it makes no difference what we think. It makes a lot of difference what the NFL execs think. But I want to do rapid fire here with some of these guys, and I want you to tell me where their best fit is. One caveat, Brant. I don't care how much you'd love to see it for fantasy. You cannot name the Kansas City Chiefs as a landing spot for these wide receivers, just because I want to get some different takes on some of these guys here and just kind of see where we could make some fantasy relevancy for some of these players. Okay. And then we'll get into the running back second. I guess got some wide receivers here. So let's start off with the biggest one, I think that's most recent, and that's Davante Adams. Where does Davante Adams play football?
Green Bay Packers. You need a wide receiver one. He's been there. He's done that. I would love to see Green Bay give him another chance there. And I would absolutely love to see Davante Adams going into Green Bay. I think that would be a great spot for him.
I think, Brant, my prediction, honestly, is that of the Los Angeles Chargers. I think Davante Adams is a Los Angeles Charger. He's kind of mentioned he wants to go to the West Coast a little bit. I think he wants to go play in some nice weather, get himself out into that Hollywood scene potentially, go play with a good quarterback in Herbert, a good head coach in Harbaugh, got a solidified guy who I think would stay probably the number 1/1B and Lad McConkey, who's a slot guy. Adams obviously going to be on the outside. Take some pressure off of Quentin Johnston. Maybe he could watch how to catch a football from Davante Adams. But I think it'd give that offense a really valid number 1A, 1B wide receiver that would really open up that offense. And I think that would I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here because I made it my bold take. I don't know if you even saw it on our page for us for content. I said the Los Angeles Chargers could be the sneaky team to win the AFC West. I think they are one huge wide receiver addition away from doing just that, Brant.
Okay. I absolutely agree. They definitely are. They got to open that offense up a little bit more.
All right. I'm going to go through the next wide receiver. Also, I didn't say this, but not their current spot either. Chris Godwin. Where's Chris Godwin play next season for fantasy purposes? Not logical. Not logical fantasy.
You already took away the one spot where I logical and think his fantasy relevancy is amazing in Kansas City. So I got to rack my brain here. Let's see another slot guy. What about the Houston Texans? You're missing out on Tank Dell. You need a slot guy to fill in for a year or two. I know Godwin's still young. This is a guy that I could see Houston Texans taking a shot at him as a good receiver for them.
Well, if I took away your landing spot in Kansas City, you just took mine away in Houston Texans because that was where I was going to go with Chris Godwin. I will say, though, I think if Chris Godwin's not a Houston Texan, I think another team that we've talked about, in person together a lot about being really aggressive this year that I think could use a strong wide receiver too is the Dallas Cowboys. I think Chris Godwin, obviously opposite of CeeDee Lamb would be really intriguing for fantasy purposes. We all know Dak's going to throw the ball 35 plus times a game. I know you talked about how you're not really a huge fan of Dak and a believer, but man, Dak gets a little more appealing when he's got a decent second option outside of CeeDee Lamb.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, how about a former Cowboy and Amari Cooper, Brant?
And I can't use his spot now. Let's go with the New England Patriots. They need a wide receiver. Let's go with the guy that could come in, be a veteran presence. Let's go with the New England Patriots for Amari Cooper.
I absolutely love the New England Patriots. I think they are getting a wide receiver one somewhere, whether it's the NFL draft or free agency. I thought T. Higgins would be a great fit there, but yeah, I think Amari Cooper makes a lot of sense there. However, Brant, I'm going to put Amari Cooper with another young quarterback in the Carolina Panthers offense. I feel like Amari Cooper would be a great role model for Xavier Legette. If they could understand each other. I watched a video the other day. Adam Thielen's like the only wide receiver in the wide receiver room, and he has to translate for Xavier Legette in meetings. I thought that was hysterical. Bryce Young even said, yeah, sometimes I can understand him. Sometimes I got to be like, today's not the day, bro. We can't talk, which I thought was hysterical. But Amari Cooper, I think, going into we saw what a veteran presence like Adam Thielen meant to Bryce Young. I think Thielen's obviously still going to be there. Xavier Legette's kind of coming into his own. He's really getting to be trustworthy. I think you put Amari Cooper on like a 2-year deal there to kind of be the guy this year, and then next year move into like a Robin role where Xavier Legette takes the full-fledged Batman deal and Thielen kind of rides off into the sunset. I think is a really good marriage for both the Panthers and Amari Cooper. So that's kind of my spot for him.
Okay. I do like that.
All right, Brant. Stephon Diggs.
Back to Buffalo he goes.
The
connection's already there. He needs a true number one. They trust each other. I think it's back to Buffalo. Stephon Diggs goes.
Okay. So I'm going to say this, and I don't know how much I love this, but I think the Rams could be a fit for Stephon Diggs in free agency, especially if Cooper leaves. But I think he could even be a fit if Cooper doesn't leave, make it a Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, Stephon Diggs deal. But if Stephon Diggs wants to go someplace where he's the guy again, that changes some things. But I do think Stephon Diggs, I think you could see him going to, if Tampa Bay misses out on Chris Godwin, I think you could see Stephon Diggs go there because I don't think Stephon Diggs is going to be one of the early dominoes to fall, Brant. I really don't. I think he's going to kind of be an afterthought because his diva personality had the injury last season. But I think if Chris Godwin escapes Tampa Bay somehow, I think you could see Stephon Diggs being a great fit there. Also, Green Bay could be a spot for him if they miss out on the top guys in the draft and they don't get any of these big name guys right off the rip. That could be a spot where I could see him go.
Absolutely.
All right. Last wide receiver for you, Brant, to wrap your brain around here. It was a little mind-boggling a few years ago. In my opinion, you liked him a little bit more his first year. Christian Kirk, who was released today. Where does he play ball next year?
So I got 2 spots for him, and both are going to be pending on if they miss out or if something happens. Take over that Chris Godwin role there in Tampa Bay if Chris Godwin moves on. Cooper Kupp moves on, takes over that Cooper Kupp role there in the Rams. I think he finds he's a great slot guy. We saw that. What was it? His first year there in Jacksonville, he did phenomenal. He was great for Trevor Lawrence. And his second year, he kind of fell off when they added BTJ. So I think Kirk is going to be one of the last dominoes to fall, and he's going to fill in to a role. He could also be in Dallas. Dallas needs that wide receiver too, but I think it's whichever one of those two lose their slot guy. I think Christian Kirk's coming in.
You ready for this one, Brant? Hot take. Christian Kirk's a New York football giant next season.
Okay.
Got Wan'Dale Robinson in the slot, Malik Neighbors, and Christian Kirk on the outside for whoever quarterback ends up in New York. I think that may be a spot where you see Christian Kirk made a priority. He doesn't have to be the number one. He doesn't have to be the slot all the time. Wan'Dale Robinson's there. Kirk, I think, ends up being a priority. Get him as like a second, third option for that offense. Get whatever young quarterback they get in the door. Get him some weapons right off the bat. Again, not needing that big alpha with already having Malik Neighbors. I think that's the spot where you see Christian Kirk end up, man.
Okay.
All right. Running back free agents are kind of meh. So same role with these guys. You can't put them back on the team they're coming from, even though it may be the most logical landing spot. Let's just get creative with this. Aaron Jones we'll start off with first. Where do you want to see Aaron Jones at next year for some fantasy relevancy?
Well, he's probably going to end up back in Minnesota, but he is going to wind up, let's see. Aaron Jones is going to wind up a Tennessee Titan. They had Pollard. They had Spears. Those two didn't really work out. They had injuries. Pollard did have a pretty good year. I think Aaron Jones is a Tennessee Titan.
That's interesting. I don't know how I feel about that fit. I don't hate it. I don't love it. I think my fit for Aaron Jones that I think I really like is I think the Los Angeles Chargers draft a young power back and they add Aaron Jones as an early compliment who kind of starts the season as the guy and maybe slides to the rear at the end of the season, but he goes and tries to get himself a ring with Devontae Adams in Los Angeles, Brant. What do you think of that?
That'd be very interesting, but I definitely could see it working.
All right. In my opinion, I think the biggest running back in the free agency class, Najee Harris. Where do you think he ends up?
So I'm not going to steal yours because I know where you think he ends up. So I'll bounce away from that. I'm going to say this one's tough because I think the spot that you want to talk about, I think is the best spot and most likely.
Go ahead.
He's going to be a Dallas Cowboy. I think that they're going to pay him. He wants 8 to 10 mil, I think is what I read earlier. That's too high for the Steelers. I think you see all these moving and grooving parts. I think they go, we're going to put it in you. We know you can tote the ball 200-300 times. We're going to put the ball in your hands. Najee Harris will be a Dallas Cowboy.
I do like the Dallas Cowboy fit, Brant. I really do. But that's not where he's going. There's a head coach in the NFL this year that you're very familiar with that loves him a power back. Najee Harris is a Vegas Raider, baby. Got the dreads. He's got those flowing locks coming out the helmet, looking like Marshawn Lynch of the younger days. Power back, good through the tackles. Pete gets what he wants, doesn't have to use a draft pick on him. Still got plenty of juice left in the tires. I think Najee Harris goes and gets a career resurgence with the Vegas Raiders. I think you see him talked about as a fantasy staple if he goes to the Raiders. Not just a fantasy relevant player, a fantasy staple. Finally gets Najee Harris into the top 10 in fantasy running backs if he ends up there, Brent. That's my juicy take if that happens.
Okay.
So obviously, there's going to be some big breaking news in between now and the next time we do this, Brant. Obviously, the Fantasy Holics is going to be your best place to get that news because they're quick. They put out fantasy relevancy to the post. It's the spot to be. If that's where you're going to get news, that's the spot. Obviously, we're going to cover this next Wednesday, talk about what we think the fantasy impacts of some of these guys signing early is going to be. And Brant, it's getting into this time of the season where it's get excited. The NFL draft, free agency happens. You get excited for a few weeks, and then you get that long 3 months until training camp starts, or 2 months till training camp starts. But I'm getting the itch again. We're getting close.
Yeah, absolutely. Those long 3 months are going to be entitled to focusing on, for me, on these rookies, looking at their tapes, breaking down their film. How are they going to fit with their new offense? That's how I'm going to try to do my best those long 3 months of wait. This time last year, I was already diving into film, and I think I fell in love with way too many guys way too quick. So I'm trying to pace myself a little bit this year. I don't want to go into a draft going, I'm going to get this guy, 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 and then only have one draft pick.
Right.
But yeah, it is that time where football's starting to have a little more meaning than it did over the last little bit. There's stuff actually happening now. We're seeing big releases. We're seeing people get their caps in order. Seattle saving so much with their cuts and possibly trades. And then who else made a whole bunch of cuts? I just saw this the other day too. I don't know. The Saints are going to have to release half their team in order to get back underneath the cap.
Bears are getting good up front.
The Bears didn't make cuts, but they added 2 offensive linemen that are great and didn't really have to use a whole lot of draft capital. It's starting to get there. It really is, and it's starting to look that we're going to have to start weighing in on some of these teams on how they look with after adding some free agents.
Absolutely. So I think that does it for us today, Brant. We'll be back live next Wednesday or Tuesday, one of the two. We'll be out live one of those 2 days. I think we're going to try to go live on the YouTube channel once a week, at least during the stuff where there's some busy stuff going on, in case you guys want to jump in, chime in, say hi, whatever. Maybe as things start slowing back down again after the NFL draft, we go back to doing non-live episodes for a few weeks so we can, give our makeup artists some time off. But, I think that does it for us, Brant. So.
Absolutely. That's it. Thanks for joining in. The Fantasy Holics are working on a revamp of the page a little bit and putting out more relevancies with each one of their posts. But so make sure you guys stay tuned to that. It's going to look a lot better. And make sure you guys check out our new picture that will be posted with this episode. So make sure you come and check out our new graphics. That does it for the Fatboyz. So as always, stay hungry.
Stay fat, my friends.